Good morning, and thank you all for joining us on our first of our autumn schedule of webinars. I am absolutely delighted to welcome Paul O'Hara and Helen McCormick as our panellists for this morning's session. Before we get started, I would like to tell you just a little bit about Hourglass. Formerly known as Action on Elder Abuse, the charity has been in existence for almost 30 years. We'll celebrate our 30th anniversary in May of 2023. Our mission is very simple: end the abuse of older people and create an environment and a society that values and recognises safer ageing. So we are Hourglass, the only UK-wide charity calling time on the harm, abuse and exploitation of older people. It is no exaggeration to say that financial abuse of older people is the crime of the 21st century, with 1 in 5 people in Northern Ireland over the age of 60 affected by financial abuse every single year. And as a society across the UK every year, 2.7 million people are touched by abuse of older people. So this is a really important session for us this morning. Our helpline last year took almost 15,000 calls, 37% of those related to financial abuse of older people. When we talk about financial abuse of older people, we welcome the Domestic Abuse Act across the UK, which broadened our scope and our understanding of what financial abuse is. It also now includes the inability to work due to coercive or controlling behaviour. It also includes pressures around power of attorney, change in wills. And it just includes the theft of older people. We know that around 1/3 of people in the UK today don't see that taking money from an older person's bank account without their permission is abuse. So we're starting from a very low baseline in terms of knowledge and understanding of the issue, but we're also dealing with a very casual attitude towards what are ultimately crimes against older people. The purpose of the webinar today is to discuss why partnerships and collaborative working are so important in preventing the abuse of older people. And today, I hope we can chat about how we can work together and what other organisations can put in place to prevent the financial abuse of older people. I'm absolutely delighted to see Paul O'Hara from Danske Bank, Northern Ireland. We have a long history of working together. And I also welcome Helen as Trust Adult Safeguarding Specialist. So I will hand over to Paul to give us a short presentation.
Thank you, Veronica. I'll just share my slides here, get going. Can you see the screen okay there?
Yes,
yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me along today. My name is Paul O'Hara and I work for Danske Bank. Protecting our older customers and more vulnerable customers is something that I'm very passionate about in my work. Today, I'd like to talk to you about our financial abuse strategy and what we have done to help and support our older customers. We'll talk about the collaboration that Veronica has mentioned there and how this has really helped us along our journey in the past few years. So I am responsible for that wider vulnerable customer strategy at Danske Bank, and this includes protection for older customers, but I don't do this alone. I do this with support from my team, with support from stakeholders within the bank, from other departments, and with external organisations help the likes of Hourglass and the Health Trust. Just to give you a bit of context about Danske Bank, we were formerly known as Northern Bank. For those of you who don't know, we're owned by Danske Bank from Denmark. We're a retail bank in Northern Ireland. We're the largest personal bank here, but we have a very small footprint in the British mainland. And the vast majority of our business is conducted here in Northern Ireland. We have about half a million customers for personal and business. Today, I want to just talk to you about a bit of our background, our journey, how we've got to this point, discuss our framework for supporting older customers and what we have put in place there, our training, the stamp protocol, as we call it, and our case management system, and a bit about prevention as well towards the end. So just to kick off, back in 2019, you'll remember, Veronica, we met with yourself and it was Action on Elder Abuse at that stage, and Nigel Bloomer from the Office of Care and Protection. And you came into our offices in Danske Bank and spoke to about 30 of our colleagues on the issue of financial abuse. I was relatively new into the team and just taken on this responsibility, and we were looking at conduct in the bank, which includes vulnerable customer protection. And Veronica had spoken so passionately about this issue. This initial meeting was critical if I look back now, because it opened our eyes to the scale of the problem in Northern Ireland, because it was something that we were not familiar with, we hadn't seen, or we just didn't know to look for, maybe. That was, I suppose, as a responsible business, we wanted to find out more about how we could protect our customers and how from financial abuse, and particularly the elderly. I remember Stephen often talks about your conversation, Veronica. He says he asked you, what can we do as a bank? And you said, look, you need to slow down, you need to ask more questions, you can't be so quick to act. And it has been great advice and something that we always hold with us. You know, we need to be a bit more nosy, I think, and ask a few questions. You know, why do you want access to your mummy or dad's account? You know, just to get down and drill down to that. So our framework, I want to take you through the framework that we devised to support older customers. And we did this in conjunction and working with Hourglass. We have a stamp protocol. We'll go into a wee bit more detail about that. That's to help our colleagues and to help raise awareness and focus on this issue. Training has been key in this journey as well, to highlight that or to create that awareness with colleagues. And then how we manage the cases that come up of financial abuse and what we do with them. So first of all, our stamp protocol that we've mentioned in conjunction with Hourglass, we put this in place to aid and support our colleagues when they spotted signs of potential financial abuse. I suppose this area has 5 key focuses that we wanted our colleagues to be mindful of. They range from frauds and scams, transactional activity on a customer's account. It also included access to banking, various methods that someone would get access to their money. We looked at capacity as well as a big issue. Does someone have the ability to manage their own finances? And looking at access with cards and PINs to accounts. So this is the stamp checklist that we had compiled. It stands for scams, transactions, access, mental capacity, and PINs. And when compiling this, we focused very much on the word content. We wanted our colleagues to trust their gut, to go with their instinct, because very often when something just didn't feel quite right, that was right. And we needed to ask a few more questions until we were content with the situation that the customer wasn't at risk for harm. If we look at scams, you know, we're looking at someone being dishonest here. You know, there is a slight difference between financial abuse and fraud. They are sort of two sides of the one coin, if you like, but one is the family member, one is a stranger, but again, still the same outcome and still the same risks for our customer. Transactions is a big one. Is there something suspicious on an account? We look for an ATM, point of sale, e-banking activity. You know, is this in keeping with a customer of a certain age? If they are housebound and there's an ATM transaction in London, is that quite right? Does that add up? So these are the sort of things that we wanted to look for. Access is a big one. Of course, this is how someone gets at the money and is able to financially abuse a customer. You know, do they have they accessed through legal rights or the correct way, or are they just taking over control of cards and e-banking? And we'll touch a wee bit about the types of access, like enduring power of attorney and appointeeships a bit later. Mental capacity, you know, are there concerns there with capacity? Can they make their own decisions? Is there understanding there? can they make that fine, sound financial decision on their own? And PINs at the end, this is something that we see a lot, unfortunately, when someone has given over access to their account, to their card, to their PIN number, thinking, oh, can you just go and lift me money? And then someone now has access to their account and access to their funds. So this is the stamp checklist that we put together to aid our colleagues, sort of a simple summary of things to look out for, the red flags to spot this potential financial abuse. Training, we've mentioned training is very important here to raise that awareness. We wanted to shape the stamp protocol, the training around the stamp protocol. We wanted to focus the colleagues' attention on spotting that potential financial abuse and to make it easier for them. As we mentioned, Veronica started the training a few years ago with 30 colleagues. We have delivered virtual sessions. We've done individual sessions with our departments, maybe ones that are more closer touches with customers. We have this incorporated into a yearly computer-based training that every member of staff at Danske Bank needs to be aware of. We have anyone joining new into the bank, they will get training on vulnerability training, and this will include and touch upon the issue of financial abuse, with a particular focus nearly always on older customers. And we've had training as well, Helen, with yourselves. Your team has delivered to our key stakeholders, are sort of more serious, the team that deals with the more serious cases, and I've been lucky enough to go out as well and do a bit of training with your team. So this has all been helpful with us building up our knowledge and experience, understanding what happens. I know Helen will talk about when we refer to the trust, but also our guys understanding when we should refer to the trust, what is right and what is appropriate. So it has been very, very useful along the journey. So how do we become aware of financial abuse? I suppose there are 3 channels through which we can become alerted. Firstly, through our branches, when customers present to us, so they display worrying behavior, and their requests may cause some concern. Sometimes they may be accompanied by someone else standing beside them at the counter, prompting them. We also have a dedicated contact center where customers can phone in. And this is another channel through which we can become alerted to potential abuse. A common scenario here is when we can hear that voice in the background prompting someone, telling them to transfer money or to put something onto the account. And finally, we can become aware of potential abuse through our transactional monitoring systems. What I would say here is that these systems are not perfect and they can only do so much. And it is very difficult to build in sets of rules into a system that is sophisticated enough to support financial abuse. These can be very often very low level amounts of money, stuff that, at first glance maybe wouldn't seem out of the ordinary, but it's only with a bit of digging, a bit of local knowledge, a bit of understanding that you think, right, this doesn't quite add up to this customer profile. So ultimately, I think human involvement when we're reviewing the cases is key, because they can spot that unusual or worrying behavior from a customer. If they're face to face, they can see the body language, they can see that something isn't quite right. Or over the phone, if a customer is housebound, even speaking to them on the phone, they can get a sense that if they're maybe under some sort of coercive control, or they're maybe having issues with capacity. So there's many ways there, but what I would say is, our colleagues, the human interaction here, the human mind, to be able to discern this is a risk, we need to delve a bit further. That is key, and that's important. So when we become aware of these financial abuse cases, we have a case management system. We work with our friends, Helen, in the social care and the local health trusts. When we are concerned about a customer's welfare, we can make a referral out to them for them to check on them. We've created these trusted relationships with the 5 bodies here in Northern Ireland that we can reach out to, and it has proved very, very valuable to have that connection, that person to go to, or team or department. We work also with the Office of Care and Protection as well. If we are concerned about a control order or a power of attorney that is being abused potentially by someone, and we monitor our cases as well. Cases that are escalated from the front line, when a colleague can't deal with that, will very often come through to my team, and we will manage that through to some sort of a resolution. we keep an eye on that. We meet monthly to discuss these cases, and we look and share best practices and see, and try to learn from each other. What I would say is I haven't come across 2 cases that are the same. They're always unique. There's always something different when you come to vulnerabilities and to financial abuse. So there's always new things to learn and new angles to consider when we're looking at these cases. I want to talk a bit about preventing financial abuse. Prevention is always the preferred option, I suppose, rather than having to deal with someone that has become the victim. And we've taken great efforts at Danske Bank to try to educate our colleagues on how to give customers advice and support on how to keep themselves safe from financial abuse. Access to customers' account is critical, and it's important that the customer understands how to do this in a safe way. It's also important that they understand what they're doing when they're giving the customer access. So, for example, if a parent asks for their adult child to be joint on their account, do they really understand what that means, that they are giving them full and unlimited access to their account? And if they died first, that means that account would pass to that adult child. I do feel there is a lot of education needed for society. There needs to be a greater awareness on these matters for customers on how to protect themselves, but also as well from the families of those older customers. They need to be educated as well as to what are the right options for their mother or father or loved one going forward. Very often we only become aware, of customers potentially are on a dementia journey or have lost capacity after it's too late, and it's too late to put those great measures like an enduring power of attorney in place. And when this happens, the options are very limited for the customers. So there are some great things out there to help customers protect themselves. At Danske Bank, we have what's called a care account, but many other banks have something very similar named like this. And it's a ring-fenced account with limited access to funds. And it's a great way to allow a care or a trusted person access to a limited amount of cash without sharing their card and PIN details to their main account and their main money. I like it because it gives our customers independence. They may not maybe have, say, the physical ability to get out and go to the shops like they used to, but the mental capacity is there. And there's always a reluctance, for people to give up that full control. And it is a controlled way to let someone help them. We do try and encourage customers to go for an enduring power of attorney, as this means they're protecting themselves should they lose capacity in later life. And this option ensures that the customer's wishes are carried out should that happen. The appointeeship as well is I know it's different name throughout the different countries, but it is a great option for just managing social security benefits. And it is also, it can be put in place if a customer has or has not got mental capacity. Control orders, we know once capacity is gone and nothing is placed, control order is a route to go, but it can be quite expensive. There's a lot more paperwork and a lot more accountability to them. And we do offer third-party mandates as well in a limited capacity, but we would encourage customers, depending on the circumstances, to go for the care account, enduring power of attorney. But again, it's their decision at the end, whatever suits them. What I would say and caveat that is that none of these options come without risk, but the solutions offer the customers greater protection should they put nothing in place at all and hand over all their bank details or their card or e-banking access. At Danske Bank, we've developed some leaflets to help our customers as well. They help keep themselves safe. We have a planning ahead guide, which details all of the customer support options that we've talked about, powers of attorney and so forth. We have a step-by-step guide as well, which helps explain how to keep yourself safe with PIN numbers, access to internet banking, all of those sorts of things as well. And a lot of this necessity and need, I suppose, was born out of COVID. People were almost forced to go down these options, but they need to know, I suppose, how to use them safely. And UK Finance as well produced a leaflet that most banks, I think, will cover, called It's Your Money, and it details about how you can help someone who's a victim of financial abuse. And we supply those in our branches and on our website as well. And finally, I just wanted to finish with one point here, that disclosure from customers or family member about potential vulnerabilities of their situation is very important. There's only so much that we can be aware of. I talked about how the systems aren't perfect, and it's a lot of the time it's a human eye catching something. So there's only so much we can do when we're face to face. And as we move to a more digital age where we will have less and less customer interactions, our transaction monitoring isn't sophisticated enough. But if we're aware of a customer situation, if they're housebound, if they have a long-term illness, if they have a carer, if they're in a home, if they are on a dementia journey, that helps us greatly with the protection that we can put in place. It also raises that flag for us that we can have a look at that account and monitor it a little bit more closely. That's the end of my presentation. I'll just stop sharing here.
Brilliant, Paul. Thank you so much. That's been a really informative overview of the journey that Danske Bank has taken over the last 3-4 years. Certainly, Hourglass would commend Danske Bank for understanding the issue and taking it up and really addressing what are sometimes very complex issues. So thank you, Paul. Stamp protocol is very interesting. I'm sure we're going to have some questions around that. I have a question. I'm not going to put you on the spot now, but I do have a question around whether UK Finance are doing enough in this regard, but we'll come back to that. So I'd like to now hand over to Helen McCormick, Southern Trust Adult Safeguarding Specialist, who's going to talk us through the trust response to financial abuse.
That's great. Thank you very much, Veronica. Folks, can I just check that you can see my presentation? Yeah, great. That's brilliant. Okay, so folks, as Veronica said, my name is Helen McCormick and I am the Trust Adult Safeguarding Specialist for Southern Trust. And here in Northern Ireland, we work to the Regional Adult Safeguarding Prevention and Partnership Protection Policy 2015. So I'm just going to outline to you the definitions as to why a case would then come into the adult protection team where we have a financial concern. I'm also going to outline to you the definition in the policy in relation to financial abuse. And then I'm going to talk you through when we receive a referral from the likes of Danske Bank, how the trust would then manage that referral. Okay, so financial abuse. Under the current definition in the Regional Adult Safeguarding Policy, financial abuse is actual or attempted theft, fraud, or burglary. It is the misappropriation or misuse of money, property, benefits, material goods, or other asset transactions which the person did not or could not consent to, or which were invalidated by intimidation, coercion, or deception. This may include exploitation, embezzlement, withholding pension or benefits, or pressure exerted around wills, property, or inheritance. So, currently in Northern Ireland, when we receive a concern, we must make a decision whether this is an adult at risk of harm or an adult in need of protection. And depending on the category, that then, I suppose, highlights the response that we would offer that individual. So if you first of all look at what an adult is when we consider them to be at risk of harm, an adult at risk of harm is a person aged over 18 or over whose exposure to harm through abuse, exploitation, or neglect may be increased by their personal characteristics and/or their life circumstances. So in that case, if we're considering our older population, so an individual over the age of 18 who may have a condition, Alzheimer's, and they may have an underlying mental health condition, then that automatically will put that individual at risk. So how does that then change in terms of when we need to consider when that adult requires protection? So again, it is a person aged 18 or over whose exposure to harm through abuse, exploitation, or neglect may be increased by their personal characteristics and their life circumstances, and who is unable to protect their own well-being, property, assets, rights, or other interests, and where the action or inaction of another person, so a third party, is causing or is likely to cause him or her to be harmed. So currently, folks, that is the definition in Northern Ireland, which in the Adult Protection Gateway team, we would look to, I suppose, when the Danske Bank make a referral, we look to that definition. So as Paul referenced, I'm delighted that we were able to undertake some training. So I myself attended Danske Bank, and then Paul very kindly returned the favour and of sessions with the DAPOs, which is a designated adult protection officer who has responsibility for coordinating investigations. And that was a really good opportunity for us to learn from each other in terms of for the bank to understand an adult at risk of harm and an adult in need of protection. And then for trust staff to understand the things that we need to consider when we've been made aware of a financial concern. So on the screen, I'm sharing with you the pathway that we have identified and created to share with our Danske Bank colleagues for them to be able to understand the thresholds. So the definition of an adult at risk of harm, and then the definition of an adult in need of protection, so that we can ensure that the appropriate referrals are being sent to the appropriate service. So that prevents undue delay. It prevents unnecessary referrals coming into a very busy adult protection gateway team. And we've also made available the services and the contact numbers for those teams so that referrals can be, I suppose, prioritised and categorised in an appropriate way. And that really has been very effective. So when the trust receive a referral from an organisation such as Danske Bank, how do we respond to that referral? So in a nutshell, as an example, Danske Bank will contact the Adult Protection Gateway team directly via email, and they will provide us with the name and the contact details for the bank customer and an outline of that concern. The Adult Protection Gateway team will then conduct a series of systems checks to confirm if the customer is known to the trust. If the customer is a client of the Southern Trust, we will pass that concern on to the team that has responsibility for that client and ask that they follow up the concern. Now, there is a caveat to this, obviously, in terms of confidentiality, folks. We will not confirm with the bank at this stage if the client is known to the team. We will take that information and just confirm that we have actioned that information. If the customer are not known to the trust, but we have concerns in terms of the definition, we employ the best fit model. And the best fit model here in Southern Trust is where we look at the needs of the client, and we will make the decision to then pass that referral on. So it may go to the Psychiatry of Old Age team or the Memory Service, for example, where we perhaps have concerns about the individual's capacity. Or if we know that there is an underlying physical health condition, then we'll send that on to our local integrated care teams to carry out an assessment of need. So I have a series of questions here. These are not obviously exclusive. It will depend on the individual, but I suppose I would just keen for you to understand, how do the teams conduct this assessment? We are very much around a relationships-based model in Southern Trust. We would encourage our teams to make contact with the individual and their next of kin and to request a home visit in order to go out and to speak with the individual and or their next of kin with consent. And this really enables us to carry out a thorough assessment and to ensure that we understand the current risks for that individual. So we will ask very direct and courageous conversations, because we feel that in order to really understand the concern, we have to ask the questions. Now, obviously, again, this will depend on the individual. And as Paul has referenced, each case is very different. And that's why we will always, where individuals are known, go to that team to request them to undertake that initial assessment, because they know the person best. And as we all know, our financial business is a very private matter. It is a very difficult conversation to have with individuals. I know if someone was to come to me to ask about my personal financial banking, you know, it is a very private matter. So there is a lot of sensitivity around it. So the questions will depend on the concern that is being raised. So you'll see the series of questions, maybe asking someone around if someone has borrowed money from them, but maybe that hasn't been paid back. Or we may ask questions around where the individual may feel pressured to give money. We will then maybe ask questions around, I suppose, in terms of where we see that an individual should have reasonable amounts of money coming into their account, but there are gaps, so maybe bills aren't being paid, or there isn't maybe enough money, or sorry, enough food in the house, then that would automatically start to cause red flags. So we will ask a series of questions. I won't go through all of those because you can see there are quite a few, but again, in the next slide, we will then maybe start to talk about where we've had concerns around where maybe someone has been persuaded or coerced into signing documents that maybe weren't in their best interests. We may ask questions around where the individual may feel manipulated to give larger amounts of money, and particularly larger amounts of money where an individual may already say gift to a family member, where they maybe start to feel that pressure, where they would say that actually, yes, that would be normal. However, over the last period of time, we've had to give maybe significant amounts of money. So it's starting to have those questions to understand, do we have a concern, and what level is the concern at? Now, obviously, I'm very minded that this is where an individual would have the capacity to have that information. And again, that is where we would go back to our core teams who know the client best. We may then have to seek information from the next of kin, but obviously being minded that it may be actually the next of kin who is the person alleged to have caused harm. So again, there's a lot of conversation, a lot of preparation by the team prior to going out to see the individual. Okay, so as a service, we would regularly speak with our teams around points to consider when a financial concern is being raised. So in those initial information fact-finding periods, we would ascertain the client's capacity. If the individual has capacity, then our approach is that we would ask the question directly to the person, okay? We bottom out the detail. We try to ascertain what the concerns are. Early intervention is best, and as Paul said, it is key. So again, a recent pilot that we've undertaken within Southern Trust, adopting the signs of safety approach, using the curious questioning model, where we would, similarly to the series of questions that I've just shown you, really speak with the individual and be very frank about what the nature of our concern is. And we find that that gives us the best, I suppose, understanding of the current level of risk for that individual. We would then look to the care plan, the annual review, and the financial questionnaire, particularly where a client is maybe subject to supports in the community by a dom care package, or where the individual is a resident in a nursing home regarding finances. We would link with our finance department of the trust if the individual is subject to appointeeship, or we would link with the finance department, for example, of a nursing home, to understand if the individual is receiving their financial monies on a regular basis and if bills are up to date, because normally that would be a key trigger for us to understand that where a client would have, for example, say a regular blow dry on a weekly basis, is that continuing to happen, or are bills starting to mount up? We would also check if the individual is a resident in a nursing home or in a care home, if their care fees are up to date. Is the person's expressed wish to give money or to purchase goods? So again, this is about us knowing our client. It's about us being clear around the care plan for that individual. Is gifting and the transfer of money normal practice for the individual? So again, this is not about us making a decision on what is normal for the individual. This is about us understanding the client and knowing what is normal for them. We would speak with our colleagues and speak with individuals around requesting access to bank statements, to ledgers and to receipts. And as part of our review process, we would review that and look at unusual activity on the account for the individual. We would speak with the client and try to ascertain, do they appear fearful or frightened when discussing their finances? We would try to understand, do they express the feeling of feeling coerced or pressured when discussing changes to wills or to policies? And we would speak with the family. And again, I've already mentioned this, mindful that you may be speaking with the person alleged to have caused harm to try to understand the background to the concern. So quite often with concerns, when they come in initially, we have to undertake a series of background checks to be clear and to understand what is the level of risk that we are dealing with. So here in Northern Ireland, the referral form is called an APP1. And an APP1 referral form is completed when we have a concern. And in this example, it's a financial concern. So it may be on the back of the information that Paul's team has provided. The core team have then gone out to see the individual, and they now have evidence to confirm that they have concerns about the individual. So the core team, so that could be a nurse or an occupational therapist or a social worker sitting in an older person's team, will complete the APP1 referral. Their line manager will then complete section 2, confirming that the referral must come into the Adult Protection Gateway team for assessment. The Adult Protection Gateway team will then assess the information and make a decision at section 3 that they feel the referral requires an investigation. So at this point, we will have considered the individual's consent to the referral, so that's the client, and we will also have considered the capacity of the client. And the capacity assessment is twofold. It's around the individual's capacity to manage financial affairs, but it is also around the individual's capacity to consent to the referral, okay? And that is a key priority because obviously we are wanting to work in partnership with the client, and where the client has capacity, we will always be guided by the individual's expressed wish. However, I note caution. Where we have concerns at a criminal aspect, so there's been a theft, then we are duty bound to report that to police. And here in Northern Ireland, we work under the joint protocol policy, and we will complete a joint consultation with our colleagues in CRU, which is the Central Referral Unit in Belfast, and make a decision whether or not the referral meets the threshold in terms of a joint protocol investigation, where police take the lead in investigating the criminal aspect. So in this case, it would be theft, and where the trust have responsibility to ensure that we risk assess and safeguard the individual in terms of future safety around financial safety. Adult risk of harm cases are managed by the core team. So if it's a low-lying financial concern where we feel that by safeguarding an individual's finances, and for the examples I would include here would be ensuring that there's small amounts of cash in the home, that we use a locked safety box, and that there is no criminal aspect to the case, then that will be managed by the core team as everyday practice. However, as I've previously referenced, where the decision is made that the adult is at risk of harm and in need of protection, then a designated adult protection officer, so that's a DAPO, will coordinate the case and bring the case into investigation alongside an investigating officer who will support the DAPO to investigate the case. So as a trust, how do we respond to the adult in need of protection? So we ensure the immediate safety of the person and their financial affairs. And so that might be where we link back in with Danske Bank around options, around making sure that there are current safety measures on the individual's bank account. We record and we act without delay. As soon as that information is made available to the trust, we have to ensure that there is no further financial risk to the individual's account. So for example, where we have concerns that perhaps maybe an individual in a position of trust, such as a staff member, has committed the offence, then we have to take appropriate measures to ensure that no other client would be at risk. What I would say is that where we have a concern about a staff member, automatically that is referred to police because that individual is in a position of trust. And those cases generally would be managed as a joint protocol referral with police colleagues taking the lead. We ensure that the expressed wish of the client is clearly recorded. We complete a person-centered risk assessment and protection plan. And we consider a series of measures which Paul has already referenced. So for example, we may consider the carers account. We may consider appointeeship if that's not already in place. We may consider an EPO. We may consider a referral to the Office of Care and Protection. We may consider a referral to our policing colleagues to fraud and counter fraud, or we may consider a referral to our other partner colleagues such as Hourglass and to Scamwise NI. This very much depends on the nature of the concern. So currently in Northern Ireland, we are very excited about the future implementation of the Safeguarding Bill here in Northern Ireland, which I'm delighted to say is in draft form. And I suppose if we consider an allegation in relation to financial concerns, what does that mean for us here in Northern Ireland? It means that we will have the power and the duty to investigate. It means that an appropriate social worker will have the power to examine financial records to determine if the adult is at risk of harm at a much earlier point. Because currently in Northern Ireland, I have, as a social worker, no legal power to access someone's financial records. And that is the biggest challenge for us currently. However, with the introduction of the bill, this will enable us at a much earlier point to be able to understand the current risks for an individual and to put in place interim risk measures at a much earlier point. So we really are, in terms of the current financial cases that we see coming into the Adult Protection Gateway team, really quite excited about the powers that the bill is going to bring for us. So folks, that is a whistle-top tour of, I suppose, the supports that the Trust can bring to a case. But obviously, I'm more than happy to take any questions that individuals may have. Thank you.
Well, Helen, thank you. That was quite a comprehensive overview of how the Southern Trust in particular deals with cases of financial abuse of older people. I do have a few questions for you. I'm not going to put you on the spot right now. We're currently working to an adult safeguarding policy that has been deemed not fit for purpose. And I just wonder how that impacts on the day-to-day business. I also wonder, is the model that the Southern Trust has adopted available across Northern Ireland, or are we still in such a tiny population working trust by trust on individual models? I think it's really interesting what you said about how the Southern Trust is dealing with cases of financial abuse in care homes. Hourglass last year noted in all our calls and contacts that 83% of our 83% of all of our abuse contacts were in the individual older person's own home. So I think that's something that we probably need to talk about. I also wonder if joint protocol works. When we talk about the expressed wishes of the older person, the first thing that came to mind when you talked about that was a lovely gentleman I dealt with on the phone several years ago now, actually, whose son had coerced his terminally ill mother into signing over the deeds of a holiday home they had by the sea. And what upset him and his wife the most was that, not that the son then sold the holiday home, or the fact that he had coerced his mother, his terminally ill mother at the time, it was the fact that he sold all the possessions in the home. And those were items of sentimental value to this man's wife. And when I chatted through with him what his options were at that time, he said to me, I will never take any action that criminalizes the parent of my grandchildren. So how does that work in practice? and how can we take on board the expressed wishes of the individual victim. I, yes, agree. We are long overdue an adult safeguarding bill for Northern Ireland. It's something the charity's been campaigning for quite a while. I share your excitement. I don't share your optimism. I think we are still quite a long way away. But Helen, what you have given us today is really important. When we're working against a policy that has been deemed not fit for purpose, it can't be easy. And I know that you're all doing a sterling job. So we'll come back to some of those questions. I'm very conscious there are people putting questions in the Q&A option online, but we've had a few in before we started this morning's session. So I'm going to throw all questions at both of you, so just jump in and out. Our dear friend and colleague Paul Greenwood, a former UK solicitor with a 25-year career as a prosecutor in California, has contacted us, and his question relates to whether you believe that every bank employee of Danske and any other branch should be a mandated reporter of suspected financial abuse of older people. He makes the point that in California, there is a law in place since around 2008 around this issue, and they have seen a remarkable increase in cases reported to banks and law enforcement and social services when the bank believes the older person is being exploited. Can I get your thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly, Veronica. Paul, thank you for the question. I suppose initially I'm thinking, it would be good to know if the increase in reporting is actually leading to an increase in convictions. I would have concerns there, if I'm being honest. Now, you talk about mandated, so I'm guessing here there's a legal requirement. I don't think that we should put a legal requirement on colleagues. I think that is too much. They do an awful lot in their job anyway. To put this pressure on someone, I think, can be counterproductive, if I'm being honest. In my experience, when we use the stick rather than the carrot, it can have that opposite effect. Okay, so if I give you a basic example, we used to use explicit consent for getting legal as a legal right to record personal and sensitive information, and it was a difficult conversation to have. It was a legal document script that we all had to go through. What we found was colleagues, for fear of getting something wrong, they tried to steer away from it. So it kind of had that desired effect, and we weren't putting flags on customers' accounts when we should have, because people were afraid of getting things wrong. So I don't see that working. There is, when I started in the bank, all I did on the counter is we processed transactions, and we try to promote our products and services. Our colleagues are asked to do so much now in the financial services. I think this would be just adding pressure to it. The bank as an entity in itself has a responsibility to our customers, and we can be held accountable by the regulator, via complaint system, a financial ombudsman service, or a customer could take a bank to court as well. I suppose that the desired outcome is good. I just don't know if the way to get it would be the right way. It would be interesting to know that, just to see, are people reporting out of fear? Oh God, I got to report something, and we're maybe getting swamped with reports, and stuff maybe is missed in that as well. So it's a great question from Paul.
Helen, can I invite your comments on that question from Paul?
Yes, thank you, Paul, for that question. So I suppose I take the lead from Paul in terms of, I suppose, the banking piece of that. And it's one of those things. It's very difficult in terms of, quite often what we find in particular aspects of adult safeguarding in the general terms, sometimes it's having the right people trained to not dilute that, so that we're picking up the themes. But I suppose the challenge with that is ensuring that within a service that we have the right pockets of people along to be able to pick that up. So yeah, it's a difficult concept, and it is something that I can see even within the trust when we're dealing with particular aspects of it, ensuring that you have the right people trained to be able to pick it up, because particularly with the financial aspects where maybe we are having to make decisions around reporting, for example, to police, there's a nervousness around for staff panicking, thinking, I'm going to get this wrong, I'm going to make an inappropriate report. So that's why all of our consultations come in through the Data Protection Gateway team. So I can see likewise for the bank that perhaps you're wanting a cohort of people trained to be able to pick up those
control
things.
in that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
What does that training need to look like? I'm just in the chat at the moment, and I'm reading from Susan, who tells me her late parents, both with dementia, were financially abused by bank staff in a small branch. Susan believes it was a cover-up, and the manager retired, and the member of staff who was helping her with her questions went on long-term sick leave. Susan is the executor of their estate. It's 12 years now. Can she seek compensation? What level of training, awareness and understanding do we need in order to prevent those kinds of incidents? Because bank staff obviously are in a prime location to be perpetrators of this type of abuse as well.
Absolutely. I suppose what I would say here, it's a horrible story for Susan, for her parents to go through that. And yet a victim can come from anywhere, family, close friend, trusted person, you know, in a small community, I imagine, on the Isle of Wight, that they were known to the people as well. So it makes it even more sickening. But look, this, I suppose, if I think back to my presentation we talked about 3-4 years ago, there wasn't a word for this. You know, we maybe knew what this was. We didn't know what financial abuse was. It wasn't on the tongue. So it maybe wasn't as easy to spot. I think we've come leaps and bounds since then. And there's a greater awareness, a greater responsibility. There's a greater focus from the regulator as far as the banks, from the Financial Conduct Authority, on banks to do the right thing, you know, and to look after our vulnerable customers. But again, this is something when I started in the bank, I know now looking back, there were vulnerable customers that came to the counter that I spoke to, but I didn't know how to help them or support them, or there was no focus there. So things have changed. As far as legal record, I can't comment on that. I don't know anything about the law there or on the Isle of Wight. But you know, I would assume if the police were involved with that, then they would investigate it. And yeah, it's sad. It's another person in a trusted position, which is what we see, committing this crime. I suppose it's tough that it's a member of bank staff, because I'm sitting here today telling you, you know, how much we focus on this. But yeah, we have to be aware. If we, as a society, if we're all tuned in, if we're clued into this, you know, I don't think this would happen now, I suppose is what I'm saying. It would be spotted, no matter how rural or small a bank that it would be in. It wouldn't go undetected. We're probably talking sort of online banking, you know, machine learning, all of this sort of stuff transaction monitoring that can spot stuff that just doesn't look quite right on accounts.
Paul, can I just stick in on that particular point? You talk about greater responsibility on staff, and I'm sure that's difficult to manage, adding additional responsibilities onto staff. And you talk about the role of the regulator. Can I come back to the question I had originally? Are UK Finance, in your opinion, doing enough?
Well, I suppose they're a trade body, Veronica. Our regulator, the people that we really report to are the FCA. We sign up to UK Finance and we adhere to the rules and guidelines. This comes in under the banner of, you know, domestic economic and financial abuse. Probably at the moment, there's probably a bigger focus on that domestic abuse side of it. I do sit on the working groups, but it is in there. These are all you know, domestic financial abuse doesn't come on its own. It generally comes with other forms of financial abuse. If it's physical violence, sexual violence, the coercive control, all of that, it is rarely that you see it on one aspect of that alone. So there's a wider issue in there. There is work being done there. I think they're looking at a bill as well to go through in the UK. But as far as specifically looking at older customer abuse, it's somewhere, it's not as specific, I suppose, at the minute. It is generally looking at that wider domestic abuse umbrella and everything else that comes in and underneath it.
Paul, thank you so much. Helen, I'm going to come back to you. Karen has asked us a couple of questions.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on the potential impacts around the current cost of living crisis in terms of financial abuse of older people?
Really very concerned.
Very worried about
We're
this.
very concerned. We're very minded of the fact that our older population, in terms of, take for example, the individual who is at home and in her seat of support, who maybe is clear in terms of capacity and decision making, but maybe has an underlying physical health condition and is quite limited, so therefore is vulnerable in terms of the supports that they need, and maybe the fluid and flexibleness around that. So absolutely, we can see the potential in terms of the trusted individual, the trusted neighbour, the carer who comes in, who themselves is under financial pressures, and then potentially the risk to the individual. So we are very, very minded of that. The other point, I suppose, Veronica, that you made was the challenge that we meet on a daily basis is the individual's reluctance to make a disclosure about a loved one. And for all those reasons, you know, they don't want to bring a custodial issue to their son or their daughter. They help them out in other ways. So it's nearly easier to say nothing, make some subtle changes and to move on. If you maybe have a conversation with them, you might warn them off, and that will resolve this. However, we can see the potential in terms of the picture growing, for the reason being that there are pressures for lots of us in the community, but particularly for our older population, and we would be significantly concerned about that. And I think there needs to be some work done, or some sort of campaigns in relation to raising awareness, being minded of how we carry that out. But I think, yeah, it's something, Veronica, that we need to do, and we need to do now.
And on that, Helen, you know, are we a bit behind the curve?
We are and we aren't, Veronica. I suppose this is the difficulty. I mean, here in Northern Ireland, as you know, we are under significant review in terms of adult protection and adult safeguarding as a focus. And I suppose we have very much post-COVID gone back to basics. So it's about recognising, it's about responding, it's about how do we raise concerns. So through our local adult safeguarding partnerships, so that's our LASPs, we're trying to refocus the preventative message around supporting individuals, how to raise a concern, how do you recognise a concern, most importantly, what do you do about it? So it's about getting back out there, it's about linking in with our partners, such as our older persons groups, such as our PCSPs and our banks, and reminding people that this is not okay, and about reminding our older population about where they go to raise a concern. It's something that we try every day in our practice, but I do take the point, Veronica, I think there could be a much more concerted effort in terms of raising that awareness.
I suppose what comes to mind is a small piece of research Hourglass conducted in partnership with Hodge Bank in Wales about 18 months ago. We found that 94% of 45 to 70-year-olds don't think financial service providers are doing enough to protect older people from abuse. However, 35% of people across the UK think it's okay to take money from an older person's bank account without their consent, and they don't see that as abuse. So it seems to me, across the UK, we worry about our older loved ones falling victim to scams and abuse, but we feel entitled to perpetrate it ourselves. So when it comes to prevention, and Paul, Helen, both of you have spoken today about the need for prevention and early intervention. With such a casual attitude towards all of this, how do we do that? How do we increase our efforts in terms of prevention? How do we stop more older people becoming victims to this type of abuse? And Paul, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I go first. Look, no easy answer to that one, Veronica. That is the big one. We need to crack that nut. I think it comes down to education. You talk about society. There's the attitudes that are there in society. It's okay to take granny and granddad's money or mommy's money. It's fine, but I want to protect you from fraud. There needs to be that awareness that what you are doing potentially is wrong. And look, we know Northern Ireland is quite a rural area. I come from a rural background myself. Things are just done. People just have this sort of attitude out there, and it's difficult to change that. And I look back now at people at home, and I think back and I think, yeah, that person was probably being abused, but that was just the way of it. That was just the way things are done. So it's difficult for us to do, and I go back to, it's difficult to spot as well. These are a lot of the time it's low level transactions. It's stuff that on the face of it looks genuine, and a lot of the time it is a human being, looking twice at something and going, right, this just doesn't quite feel right. It's not, I'm not content about this, and doing that bit of digging. So there is that education piece. There's the wider support, when we work with Helen and the trusts and other organizations and local charities, and the older customers themselves and their family and loved ones, they need to be aware of how to protect their colleagues with the options that we have. Again, nothing is foolproof, I will say that, but there are things and measures that you can put in place that will give you greater protection, that will potentially dissuade someone from attempting. You're not so much a soft target. These customers are the easy targets. They're vulnerable. Come back to the financial difficulties. Talk about drivers. This is a driver. I'm in financial difficulties. I have issues. We've seen gambling. We've seen lots of other drivers for this heinous crime, this behavior, when they try to get access to easy money, if you like, in their eyes, or money they think they're entitled to while their parents or loved one is alive. So it's a difficult, but there needs to be that education. People need to understand. There's still, in society here in Northern Ireland, people still think a joint account is the way to go when they get older, and that is probably the worst option that you could have, and has implications. Very odd time it might be the right thing, but a lot of the time it can cause difficulties down the line. They don't know how to protect themselves. There's just been that norm. Daddy has always just given me his card, and I went to the cash machine and I've lifted his money out for them. Look, I know that happens today. That will be happening as we speak right now. But I would say a lot of the time there isn't abuse. A lot of the time there are people doing the wrong thing for the right reason. And again, that just makes it even more difficult to spot. We see lines, transactions on a page, an ATM, a cash withdrawal, a direct debit. It's difficult to piece those all together and say, right, this is something of concern here. And there's lots of things in there as well that can look like financial abuse, but maybe aren't. Maybe someone trying to keep money down in an account because of care home fees and things like that. Again, not the right thing to do, but it can look like an account is being emptied or someone is being abused. So it's very, very difficult to spot. Fraud's easy. Someone comes in, they try to wipe your account out and clean everything out. It's kind of black and white, whereas this is low level, can go on for a long time, and can become the norm and difficult to spot in there. So no easy answer for that one, Veronica.
That's really interesting, because Lynn has just put a comment into our chat, and Lynn notes that stopping financial abuse is very difficult, and the attitude of it's going to be mine anyway is difficult to change. I certainly believe that inheritance impatience,
Yes.
as I once heard it described, is a real challenge for us all. But Lynn notes There's a safety net with financial security bonds that are now available for appointeeships and power of attorney that could be introduced in Northern Ireland. Would this act as a deterrent, but also be there to pick up the financial pieces? I'm very conscious we don't have a legal voice on the webinar today, unfortunately. And I think these are some of the issues that Hourglass really needs to take forward. We're already engaged with the Office of the Public Guardian for England and Wales in their review and modernising lasting power of attorney. So just on that note, Helen, what is your experience of abuse of power of attorney in Northern Ireland?
Yes, we've had a number of cases where I suppose it's come to our attention. Obviously, sometimes the Office of Care and Protection, we do have very good working relationships. That's my first point. And cases will be escalated in through the Office of Care and Protection. And I suppose there are particular challenges with this because as a trust, it is very difficult when I suppose power of attorney and other various arrangements are put in place. Legally, that's very difficult for us because we are quite powerless, Veronica, in terms of what we're able to do to challenge that. And so really what we go back to is around building future safety and resilience. So it's about what measures can we put in place at the point where we become aware. It is not for the trust to legally investigate. That's a policing responsibility. But as we know, there are particular challenges with that. Not everybody wants to make the complaint. Sometimes the information or the detail around that isn't available to bring forward that complaint. But it's also the time that it takes sometimes to get these cases over the line. And quite sadly, sometimes, Veronica, the victim has since deceased. And that adds another layer of complexity to it. So it is a particular challenge. But I suppose from a trust position, we very much focus on the here and now. Once we become aware of the concern, what are we able to do? We have to be clear around the parameters of the trust responsibility and other organisations' responsibility. And that's what's key, Veronica. When we are looking at these cases, that initial strategy meeting where you're getting those partners around the table to explore the concerns in terms of roles and responsibilities and about required actions is critical. And being mindful of, from a trust position, what have I got available to me to be able to support the individual? What are the expressed wishes of the individual where they're able to give you that information? And what are the team able to bring to you to support us to understand the person's individual? So it is a particular challenge. And I hope moving forward that we have greater clarity in that, Veronica.
Yes, and we can only hope our forthcoming adult protection bill will give us some help and support in that sense. Now, I'm just looking at the chat. Our lovely friend and supporter, solicitor Ian Cranefield, has put a couple of messages in. Over to you, Paul. Why are banks so resistant to doing what you're doing? Does it take longer and therefore erode profits in the same way? Ian says he has believed for years if it takes longer or erodes profits, then these extra safety measures could be part of a fee paying account package, particularly where lasting power of attorney is going to be added to an account. What's your thoughts around that, Paul, from a banking perspective?
I suppose, first of all, I say I can't speak on behalf of all the banks. I can speak on behalf of Danske Bank and just generally, I think the biggest hold up here probably about around the banks and the action that we take, and Helen, you'll understand this, it's GDPR, it's sharing of data. How do you do that safely? Because if someone phones you up and say, can you tell me about your customer, Paul O'Hara, by the book, you should say, no, I don't want to, but or we can't do it, our hands are tied. This is why the relationship and the building of the trust with the trusts and with other organizations is so important. I know Helen, I've seen her, I've met her, we have direct contacts. We can share information and concerns, and I know that information is being used correctly. I suppose you have to balance these things up. We have the regulator telling us we need to be proactive, we need to protect our customers, we need to use information when we have it. We have GDPR as well. We need to, reasonable adjustments is the great term that the FCA talk about. So we need to bend and flex on this. Now, we don't do it lightly. We do share information, but it's because we have concerns. And ultimately, I suppose when I think about this, I think, not quite lesser of two evils, but it's what are you doing here? What are you trying to protect? Is it better to refer something on to Helen and have them investigate something when we are really concerned about a customer and to find out that it's okay, other than to say, you know what, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to forget about that one, and something worse could happen to the customer. So it's nothing about profits. There's nothing in there at all. It's nothing that is ever on the radar. This is about conduct. This is about a bank doing the right thing and discharging their responsibility to the regulators. Yes, I don't think that's a driver at all. Any sort of charges or any costs that are involved. These can take a time to set up for customers, but ultimately, if we get this right, this saves customers, us, protects everyone in the right sense. If we're putting on enduring power of attorneys or whatever onto an account, that's what we want. We all want that protection, that safety, that knowledge that our customers being looked after.
Ian also makes what is, I think, a very valid point, and I think an experience we've probably all had.
Yes.
He says, how come when you use your ATM card abroad, the monitoring software picks up and pauses the transaction? Or even last Saturday, when I was ordering a pizza online, I had to verify the purchase in my online banking app. But a £10,000 cash transfer out of the blue doesn't get stopped. Is it just a matter of intelligent programming of setting thresholds?
Yeah, it probably is. And now you can't comment to the £10,000 amount, but they look at what's normal transactions. We talk about knowing our customer. Where does Veronica normally buy her pizza? She doesn't buy it in Germany. If that flashes up, that is a big fraud indicator. So a lot of that again is a protective thing. If you go abroad, a lot of banks will say, look, tell me you're going to be in Australia, so that when you see your card activity, that's okay. So the lower level stuff can be flagged up. Transfers of money out of accounts, if it is unusual, if it's not in keeping with the normal account activity, again, I can only speak for Danske Bank, that sort of stuff should be flagged up. There should be something there. Plus, but if someone's coming into the counter, we would expect conversations to be had. Plus, we wouldn't give £10,000 cash out to someone at the counter as well, especially, we would be very, very reluctant to do it to a customer who we thought was vulnerable, like an older customer that we're talking about today. So there are checks and measures in place, and it's probably that unusual activity is what it flags out, and it will be down. There will be a program, there'll be artificial intelligence or something in the background that will flag that, but every bank probably does that differently. And there are lots of drivers. It's fraud and financial crime and all of those sort of things are all working in the background to try and spot these things. It's so hard. It's so hard to say that's fine. When Ian was using his card abroad, they are concerned that maybe his card details have been compromised and that someone is using it fraudulently.
Okay, I'm really conscious of people's time, and I'm really conscious that there are so many questions in the chat. How much collaboration? Sarah, one of our charity trustees from Northern Ireland, how much collaboration is there with other banks and building societies in Northern Ireland and across the UK? Paul, that's probably one for you.
It's for me. Sarah, there's some collaboration. Is there enough? No. It can be difficult to get in the door. Again, Northern Ireland is great because we're a small country. You get to know people. For example, I have a great relationship with AIB. I don't really have a partner or someone, a contact in Ulster Bank. So it just depends. You can meet other people through forums, and I would take the lead on gambling and domestic abuse that we've talked about. So you'll tend to see the same type. You'll see the Paul O'Hara from Ulster Bank popping up in those same types of meetings. So it's a way to make connections. We also work closely with the likes of MAPS and Money Guider Network. So you'll have other banks and stuff coming on. And again, it goes down to that data and that sharing. Banks are afraid to share that information with each other. And I would say the same approach should be taken. Meet these people, understand who they are, have that sort of secure, trusted ring of people within each bank that you could lift the phone and say, I'm concerned about this customer. They have an account with us and they have an account with you. Can you have a look at it? And that's the sort of pragmatic, common sense approach that we try to take. But it's difficult sometimes making the contacts,
Yeah.
Especially the bigger scale banks over in England, we really have no contacts there.
We have a few leads in AIB, and I have a great contact in Ulster Bank, Paul. So
well, you can put me in touch, please.
Pass it on.
Yes, and yeah, Helen needs these contacts.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
once the network grows, and then everybody becomes familiar, and then it is easier to share that a little bit of information, enough for someone to act on, and we're not leaving stuff out, and then who suffers at the end? It's the person, when we don't act.
Thank you, Paul. Helen, Olga has put a question in. Has the Trust seen an increase of referrals to MARAC where older women have experienced financial abuse or other types of abuse of high risk?
Yes, we have. So we are very minded. We are very minded. So our MARAC referrals have increased significantly. Here in Northern Ireland, there's been a recent change in the last year where any repeat referral to MARAC automatically comes back in. But we are noting significant increase in our older population, not necessarily just around coercive control in terms of finance, but just the general piece. And actually this week, we are doing a Train the Trainers event next Thursday, specifically around coercive control and the new stalking legislation. And that is aimed at our older service population in particular. So we're really quite excited about that. We have representation from our Public Prosecution Service and our PPU joining us next week. And that's around supporting our trainers to be able to go back into their services, to support staff on the ground, to be able to recognise and how do they respond. So we are really, I suppose, focusing on that. Yeah, absolutely.
Great, Helen, thank you. There's a few comments as opposed to questions in the chat. Anonymous tells us, just moved off my screen, bear with me. Anonymous tells us, I'm so relieved that my dad has no property and no money, though it's a challenge for us as a family as we are constantly having to dip into our bank accounts to support him with the basics. And I've just been made redundant. Just another really sad story of the world that we live in at the moment. And to Anonymous, please feel free to ring in to our helpline and have a chat about how we might be able to support you. Lynn notes many cases don't get reported if the donor has passed away. That would be one of the eternal frustrations that Hourglass would have, that all too often we only are contacted because the abuse happened, or the abuse is identified after the victim has passed away. And when we know that a victim, an older victim of financial crime, is 2.5 times more likely to die or go into residential care within 2 years of the crime than their non-victim peer, I often wonder why we're not doing more to see this as a potentially fatal crime. Joanne has noted she knows a case where a client was in residential care, but her son was using her bank card to pay for petrol, McDonald's, holidays, days out, etc. It was very clear it was for his benefit. He has power of attorney, and it was reported to the Office of the Public Guardian and the police, but the small amounts of money meant they were not interested. Are we too casual about financial crime when it comes to older people?
Yeah, I think we've talked about that attitude in society and how that needs to change, Helen. And obviously, I can't talk about the Office of Public Guardianship there in England, but yes, you know, anybody who is acting to help and support an older customer, they need their transactions, their actions, whatever they are doing, needs to be in the interest and for the benefit of that customer. It's fairly clearly that this isn't now, because there may be small, low levels. I imagine a holiday probably isn't a low level amount, but it's difficult to draw the line. You know, what is filling the car up to go and do the groceries for your elderly mother? You know, and then when to the point is you're filling the car up and you're doing your groceries as well and you're adding that on. You know, sometimes this could be a creeping thing. You know, it can start off with good intentions. You talked about the inheritance and patience term I use as well. You think, you know, well, you know, I don't get any money for doing this. Maybe I should take £20, and then it's £50. You know, when you can see that. And again, talk about the scale and difficulty to spot. If it escalates quite slowly and there's small amounts like that, it can be different. But yeah, it goes back to that. So, you know, the son that's doing that probably thought that was okay. You know, and that's the real driver here. That's the root cause. If you ask me, he needs to know that that's not okay. But ultimately, as well, there should be consequences for these actions. That, but it's a tough one, I suppose, without knowing the ins and outs of the case.
Helen, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to say that those ones are particularly quite difficult, and particularly if that was normal relationships pre going into a nursing home. And that is the dilemma that quite often from a trust position we find that would have been, you know, a normal experience for that individual. However, what I would say is that that's where our courageous conversation comes in around, excusing the term, marking someone's card, but that's essentially what it is. It's about saying to someone, whilst you may think that that's okay, it is not okay. And quite often what we find is when that comes to our attention and we are having those conversations, you can see a change in the behaviour. And it is about saying to someone, look, we will have to continue to keep this under review and to monitor it. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to take into account the expressed wishes of the individual where they're able to communicate that to you. You're obviously trying to take on board the carer's perspective on what would be perceived for them. But that's where we would sometimes also speak with additional members of the family to ascertain, you know, can you comment on this? Would this be normal practice? And it is about having those direct conversations, because it just demystifies a lot of comment. We know, and we, you know, sadly, there's lots of our families that through lots of situations, there is dysfunction in relationships. And we want to promote and support families. That's the focus of what we do. But we have to be there for the victim. So it is about getting that balance, Paul, absolutely. And it is a challenge and there is no easy win to it. But where we have information, we must act on it.
Yes, we must. But I don't think that always works in practice. I'm really conscious of time. We have 6 minutes left, and I just want to sum up. So, Paul, from a Danske Bank perspective, you have clearly taken on board the challenge and you're running with it. And Helen, I am absolutely with you. Like 10 years ago in adult protection in Northern Ireland, we weren't talking about financial abuse. We didn't actually know that financial abuse was a thing then. And I know the Southern Trust and the LASP is making excellent inroads into awareness raising right across the community at all levels. So I'm going to give each of you exactly 60 seconds to sum up before we close down. So Helen, over to you.
Thank you. So folks, prevention is key. Getting our messages out are very clear. It is about recognizing, it is about responding. Is it about listening to the expressed wish of the individual? But it's about having those courageous conversations where we have concerns, please act on them. There are many opportunities for us to raise the concern. And as a community, we owe that to our older population. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. I love that, courageous conversations. Paul, 60 seconds to sum up.
yes, I'm going to echo a lot of what Helen has said. We talked about awareness. I think that's key in society. If we change that awareness, that perception, those behaviors, all the good stuff happens then at the back of that. Prevention, yes, we would rather prevent and see our customers protecting themselves by putting in place things like powers of attorney and care accounts than have them get to the point where they are being financially abused and protect their money. Speak to us, talk to the banks. They can help and protect you. Speak to Hourglass, there's Trust. There's lots of organizations out there that can help and support our customers or people in society who are vulnerable. Because I think a lot of them are unsure of how to do that, what the risks are involved with a joint account or a power of attorney or a mandate. There's still that bit of confusion out there, but if we get that right, if we change those attitudes, if we educate society, this will be something that will be absolutely frowned upon, and it won't go. The casual attitude will go, Veronica, that you mentioned, and that is key. If that goes, all the other good behaviours come with it.
Excellent. I love it. Awareness and talk.
Yes.
There's a few more questions in the chat that we're not going to have an opportunity to get to today, but Hourglass will take those away. We'll write something up around those. Paul and Helen have very kindly agreed to share their slides. This webinar has been recorded. It will be available on our Knowledge Bank and our YouTube channel early next week. So you can download it, watch it again, and please share it with friends and colleagues. Please share it with older people that you know. Let them listen in to this conversation. Let them know that we're actually doing something around this issue that, once again, I will say, will affect 1 in 5 people over the age of 60 in Northern Ireland alone. I would like to end by thanking Paul and Danske Bank and Helen and the Southern Trust for giving your time so graciously in preparation and in terms of this morning's session. I think it's been really informative. I certainly have learned a lot myself, and I hope our colleagues joining us online have found today beneficial. I'd like to thank everyone who has logged in to be with us this morning. And with 1 minute to go, we're bang on time. So you can all go and boil the kettle before you get back to work. Thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us.